In a world saturated with words, spoken, written, and shared across countless platforms, the line between intention and action often becomes blurred. Promises are made effortlessly, commitments are spoken without thought, and declarations of values are broadcast widely. Yet, when scrutinized, many of these words fail to materialize into meaningful action. For the Stoics, this disconnect between speech and behavior was a fundamental flaw in character. Words, no matter how eloquent or persuasive, meant little if they weren't followed by consistent action. Intention, in the Stoic framework, is the bridge between what we say and what we do, and crossing that bridge requires discipline, clarity, and moral courage. The ancient Stoics, including Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, emphasized repeatedly that one's character is revealed not by grand declarations but by daily actions. A person may profess to value kindness, loyalty, or resilience, but these values only become real when they are reflected in behavior. Seneca once observed that it is easy to talk about courage in the safety of a room, but true courage is revealed only when one faces fear in the real world. The Stoics understood that intention without action is hollow, and action without intention is directionless. The two must work together to create a life of integrity. Acting with intention begins with self-awareness. Without clarity about what we value, what we prioritize, and what we are willing to sacrifice, our actions become reactive rather than purposeful. Intention is like a compass. It provides direction in a world full of distractions, temptations, and conflicting demands. When we act without intention, we become susceptible to external influences, drifting aimlessly from one impulse to the next. But when our actions are anchored in clear intentions, they become expressions of our character, not reactions to fleeting circumstances. Consider a common scenario. Someone promises to be there for a friend during a difficult time but fails to follow through when the moment arrives. While their words may have been sincere, their failure to act reveals a disconnect between their intention and their behavior. The Stoic approach would urge this person to reflect deeply on their promise, to examine whether their actions align with their values, and to take responsibility for the gap between what was said and what was done. Words are not meaningless, but they are only valuable when backed by consistency and follow-through. This principle extends far beyond personal relationships. In professional settings, promises are often made lightly, commitments to deadlines, pledges to improve teamwork, or declarations of corporate values. Yet, without concrete actions to support these claims, they become nothing more than noise. For the Stoic, intention is not an abstract idea, it's a blueprint for behavior. If one claims to value hard work, integrity, or transparency, every decision, no matter how small, must reflect those principles. Acting with intention is not limited to grand gestures. It's found in the details, the way an email is written, the honesty with which feedback is given, and the consistency with which promises are kept. Furthermore, acting with intention requires discipline. It's easy to act with clarity when circumstances are favorable, but it's far more challenging when the path is inconvenient, uncomfortable, or filled with obstacles. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that virtue isn't tested in times of ease, but in times of adversity. Intention must be paired with the will to act, even when doing so is difficult or unpopular. For example, someone who values health might intend to exercise regularly and eat well, but unless they take deliberate actions, waking up early, preparing balanced meals, resisting unhealthy habits, their intention remains unfulfilled. The Stoic approach teaches us that discipline is the engine that turns intention into reality. Acting with intention also demands humility. It requires us to acknowledge our flaws, to recognize where our actions have failed to align with our intentions, and to make meaningful efforts to correct that misalignment. Stoicism does not expect perfection, it expects effort. Epictetus often spoke of the importance of reflection, of reviewing one's day and examining whether actions were guided by reason and virtue. This practice is not about self-condemnation but about growth. Every failure to act with intention is an opportunity to recalibrate, to recommit, and to try again with greater clarity. Moreover, the Stoic emphasis on acting with intention extends to how we treat others. It's easy to declare that we value kindness, empathy, and fairness, but these values only become real when they are expressed through action. Listening attentively during a conversation, offering help without expecting recognition, or showing patience in moments of frustration. These are actions that reveal intention. Stoicism teaches that our actions toward others are not merely reflections of our principles, but opportunities to reinforce them. Every interaction becomes a chance to act with purpose, to embody our values, and to leave the world slightly better than we found it. In relationships, acting with intention builds trust. People quickly recognize when someone's words are empty or when their actions lack sincerity. A Stoic understands that consistency is the foundation of trust, and that even the smallest act can carry great weight when it's aligned with one's values. Trust is not built through grand promises or occasional heroic efforts. It's built through small, reliable, intentional actions performed consistently over time. The Stoic view of acting with intention also applies to how we treat ourselves. It's not enough to declare self-care as a priority or to talk about mental and physical well-being. These intentions must translate into deliberate actions, setting aside time for rest, engaging in practices that nurture the mind, and being disciplined about personal boundaries. Neglecting these actions while professing their importance creates internal conflict, a dissonance between values and behavior that erodes self-respect. At its core, acting with intention is about coherence. It's about ensuring that our words, actions, and values are aligned. It's about avoiding the temptation to speak grandly while acting weakly, to promise boldly while delivering poorly. For the Stoic, every action carries meaning because every action reflects who we are. Acting with intention means approaching life deliberately, with a clear sense of purpose and an unwavering commitment to integrity. In a world overflowing with empty words, acting with intention becomes a revolutionary act. It's a reminder that our character is not defined by what we say we'll do, but by what we actually do. Stoicism invites us to stop hiding behind promises and to start living through actions. Words may fade, intentions may be forgotten, but actions leave a legacy. They become the enduring markers of our character, our principles, and our contribution to the world. Through intention and action, the Stoic crafts a life of meaning, resilience, and unwavering clarity, one deliberate step at a time. In an age of constant connectivity, limitless distractions, and endless demands on our attention, the ability to set boundaries around our time and energy has become one of the most critical yet undervalued skills. Stoicism teaches us that time is our most precious resource. Once spent, it can never be recovered. Epictetus warned against scattering our focus across trivial pursuits or allowing others to dictate how we spend our time. To the Stoics, being selective with our time and energy was not an act of selfishness, but an act of wisdom and self-respect. It was about recognizing that every yes given to one thing is a no given to something else, often something far more meaningful. Modern life bombards us with invitations to fragment our attention. Social media notifications demand constant engagement, professional obligations spill into personal hours, and relationships, both personal and professional, often come with unspoken expectations of immediate availability. But the Stoics understood that true peace of mind comes from deliberate choices about where we invest our energy. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself in Meditations to focus only on what truly matters, to avoid being swept away by trivial concerns, and to guard his mental space with vigilance. This wasn't about isolating oneself from the world. It was about interacting with it on one's own terms, with clarity and intention. At the heart of this practice lies the understanding that not every request deserves our attention, not every opportunity must be seized, and not every relationship needs unlimited access to our time and emotional bandwidth. There is a finite amount of energy we can bring to our work, our relationships, and our personal well-being. When we overextend ourselves, saying yes to every invitation, every obligation, every fleeting demand, we dilute our ability to give our best to the things that truly matter. In trying to be everywhere and everything to everyone, we risk being nowhere and nothing to ourselves. Stoicism teaches us to be ruthless in identifying our priorities. Before agreeing to a commitment or giving away our time, we must ask, Is this aligned with my values? Does this serve a meaningful purpose in my life? Will this drain or energize me? These questions act as filters, allowing us to separate the essential from the trivial. Epictetus emphasized that we must treat our time as a limited and sacred resource, not something to be handed over lightly to every passing distraction or every person who demands a piece of it. By applying this principle consistently, we begin to see our energy and focus as valuable currency, something to be invested wisely rather than spent recklessly. In relationships, limiting access doesn't mean building walls or becoming emotionally distant. On the contrary, it's about creating space for healthier and more meaningful connections. When we give unrestricted access to everyone, allowing constant interruptions, entertaining every request, or tolerating emotional drain, we often find ourselves resentful, exhausted, and unable to show up fully for the people who truly matter. The Stoic approach to relationships emphasizes quality over quantity. It values depth over breadth. A handful of meaningful, reciprocal relationships will always outweigh a wide circle of shallow, transactional ones. The art of limiting access also extends to our interactions with technology. Modern devices are designed to fragment our attention, to pull us out of the present moment and scatter our focus across endless notifications, messages, and updates. The Stoic practice of mindfulness and deliberate action teaches us to reclaim our time from these digital intrusions. Seneca spoke of how people waste their lives worrying about trivial concerns and chasing superficial pleasures. Today, his words echo in the constant scrolling of social media feeds, the compulsive checking of emails, and the endless consumption of meaningless content. Limiting access in this context means setting boundaries, turning off notifications, designating screen-free hours, and being intentional about how and when we engage with technology. But perhaps the most overlooked application of limiting access is in how we treat ourselves, specifically, how we allow negative thoughts, self-doubt, and emotional clutter to occupy our minds. Just as we must guard our time and energy from external distractions, we must also guard our mental space from internal ones. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to keep his inner citadel, his mind, free from unnecessary disturbance. This means being selective about the thoughts we entertain, the fears we allow to linger, and the regrets we let fester. Not every thought deserves our attention, and not every emotional reaction deserves to be indulged. Limiting access applies just as much to our inner world as it does to the outer one. However, limiting access is not always easy. It often requires saying no to people we care about, declining opportunities that seem promising, and walking away from situations that drain rather than nourish us. These choices can feel uncomfortable, even selfish, especially in a culture that equates availability with loyalty and busyness with success. But the Stoic understands that every no is, in reality, yes to something more important, perhaps rest, reflection, or focused time on a meaningful pursuit. Courage is required to enforce these boundaries consistently. People may not always understand or appreciate when we limit their access to our time and energy. Some may react with disappointment, others with frustration. But the Stoic recognizes that their primary responsibility is not to appease everyone. It's to live in alignment with their values. As Epictetus reminds us, we cannot control how others react to our boundaries. We can only control our commitment to upholding them. In the end, being selective with our time and energy is not about shutting others out or living in isolation. It's about creating space for what truly matters. It's about showing up fully where it counts rather than scattering ourselves thinly across obligations we don't care about. It's about recognizing that our time is not an unlimited resource and that every moment spent on something trivial is a moment taken away from something meaningful. The Stoic approach to limiting access is, therefore, both practical and profound. It teaches us to value our time, to guard our mental and emotional energy, and to approach every commitment with intention. It's a practice of self-respect, clarity, and courage, a recognition that not everything deserves our attention and not everyone deserves unrestricted access to our lives. In a world that constantly pulls us in 1,000 directions, the ability to set boundaries becomes not just an act of self-care, but an act of wisdom. Through this practice, we regain control over our time, our energy, and, ultimately, our lives. In a world filled with constant noise, relentless demands, and relationships that often drain more than they nourish, the ability to recognize when to walk away is not just a skill, it's an art. For the Stoics, acceptance and detachment were not acts of indifference but profound demonstrations of wisdom and courage. These principles are woven deeply into the Stoic worldview, reminding us that clinging to what no longer serves us, be it relationships, situations, or expectations, is a form of self-inflicted suffering. Acceptance is not passive resignation, nor is detachment cold apathy. Instead, both are active processes rooted in clarity, strength, and self-respect. At its core, acceptance begins with an honest assessment of reality. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about the importance of seeing the world as it truly is, not as we wish it to be. In relationships, this means acknowledging when a connection has reached its natural conclusion, when mutual respect has eroded, or when the emotional cost of staying far outweighs any benefits. The Stoic approach to acceptance is not clouded by wishful thinking or denial. It's about confronting reality with open eyes and steady resolve, even when the truth is uncomfortable or painful. This clarity allows the Stoic to detach with dignity. Detachment, in this context, does not imply emotional numbness or avoidance. It means releasing one's grip on something that cannot be controlled or improved. Epictetus famously taught that we must focus on what is within our control and let go of what is not. In relationships, this means understanding that we cannot control other people's thoughts, actions, or feelings. We cannot force someone to respect us, reciprocate our affection, or meet our expectations. Clinging to such desires creates unnecessary suffering. The Stoic, therefore, learns to release their grip, not because they do not care, but because they recognize the futility of trying to control the uncontrollable. Walking away requires courage. It's rarely easy to leave behind something familiar, even when it's no longer healthy or productive. The fear of loss, the weight of nostalgia, and the discomfort of uncertainty often keep people trapped in situations that are slowly eroding their peace of mind. But the Stoic understands that every ending carries within it the seed of a new beginning. Seneca reminds us that life is in constant flux and that clinging to what no longer serves us is like trying to hold back a river with our bare hands. True courage lies in stepping away from something that no longer aligns with our values and trusting that the space created will allow something better to emerge. However, walking away doesn't always mean cutting ties or burning bridges. Sometimes, it means redefining the terms of engagement. It might mean setting firmer boundaries, limiting emotional investment, or adjusting expectations. In some cases, it might mean withdrawing entirely, but in others, it could simply mean approaching the relationship or situation with a new perspective, one rooted in acceptance rather than resistance. The Stoic approach is flexible, recognizing that every situation is unique and requires thoughtful consideration rather than impulsive action. Acceptance also applies to our internal world. Often, the most difficult thing to walk away from is not a person or a situation, but an expectation, a dream of how things should have been. We carry stories in our minds about how relationships, careers, or life milestones should unfold, and when reality doesn't match these stories, we resist. This resistance creates frustration, bitterness, and emotional exhaustion. But the Stoic understands that reality is indifferent to our expectations. Acceptance means letting go of these internal narratives and embracing what is rather than clinging to what could have been. It means finding peace not in controlling the outcome, but in aligning our response with reason and virtue. This form of detachment also applies to outcomes. In relationships, people often attach their happiness to how others behave or respond. They believe that if someone changes, if someone validates them, or if a specific outcome is achieved, they will finally feel at peace. But Stoicism teaches us that true peace cannot be outsourced. It must be cultivated within. By detaching from specific outcomes and focusing instead on their own actions and intentions, the Stoic frees themselves from unnecessary disappointment. They understand that while they can control their own behavior, the reactions of others remain firmly outside their sphere of influence. In practical terms, acceptance and detachment manifest in the quiet moments of clarity when one decides to let go. It could be the realization that a friendship has become one-sided, that a romantic relationship no longer fosters growth, or that a professional environment has become toxic. In each of these scenarios, the Stoic pauses, reflects, and chooses to walk away, not out of anger or spite, but out of respect for their own peace of mind. This act is not dramatic or reactive. It is calm, deliberate, and rooted in the understanding that one cannot build a meaningful life while clinging to what no longer fits. Detachment is also about protecting one's inner world. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself that external chaos need not penetrate the walls of his inner citadel, the mind. Acceptance allows the Stoic to preserve this inner space, even when walking away requires significant emotional effort. It's about choosing calm over conflict, peace over turmoil, and integrity over appeasement. Moreover, walking away does not mean failure. Society often portrays leaving a relationship, a job, or a commitment as a sign of weakness or defeat. But the Stoic rejects this narrative. They recognize that walking away is, at times, the most rational and courageous choice one can make. It signifies clarity, self-awareness, and an unwillingness to remain trapped in situations that corrode one's sense of self. In the end, acceptance and detachment are not acts of cold indifference. They are acts of profound self-respect and wisdom. They require the ability to see reality for what it is, the courage to face discomfort, and the strength to prioritize inner peace over external validation. For the Stoic, walking away is not about abandoning responsibility. It's about taking responsibility for oneself. It's about recognizing when a situation can no longer be salvaged, when one's presence is doing more harm than good, and when it's time to close a chapter with grace. Through acceptance and detachment, the Stoic learns to live with both clarity and compassion. They understand that walking away is not always an end, but often a beginning, a chance to reclaim their time, refocus their energy, and realign their life with their deepest values. In a world that often glorifies relentless attachment, the Stoic approach offers a radical alternative, the quiet strength of letting go. In a world marked by fleeting connections, misunderstandings, and emotional walls built out of pride and fear, the Stoic virtues of unconditional love and forgiveness stand out as profound tools for building authentic relationships. While modern culture often equates love with intense emotion and forgiveness with weakness, the Stoics understood these virtues as deliberate choices, grounded not in fleeting feelings but in reason, wisdom, and a commitment to living in alignment with one's values. For the Stoics, love was not a passive state but an active practice, and forgiveness was not about condoning harm but about freeing oneself from resentment and emotional burden. Unconditional love, in the Stoic sense, is not about blind acceptance or tolerating harmful behavior. Instead, it is about recognizing the shared humanity in others, the understanding that every person, no matter how flawed, is doing their best within the limitations of their knowledge, experiences, and emotional state. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to approach others with compassion, understanding that their actions, whether kind or cruel, stem from their internal struggles and perspectives. This perspective shifts the focus away from judgment and toward empathy. Instead of reacting with anger or disappointment when someone falls short of our expectations, the Stoic responds with patience and understanding. To love unconditionally is to free oneself from the chains of transactional affection, the idea that love must always be earned, reciprocated, or measured. It means showing care and respect even when it is not immediately returned. This does not mean becoming a doormat or tolerating mistreatment. Rather, it means approaching relationships with a sense of internal abundance rather than scarcity. The Stoic understands that love is not a limited resource to be rationed. It is a way of being, a state of mind rooted in generosity of spirit and emotional resilience. Forgiveness, on the other hand, is often misunderstood as weakness or passivity. Many people resist forgiveness because they believe it means condoning harmful actions or surrendering power to those who have wronged them. But from the Stoic perspective, forgiveness is not about the other person. It is about freeing oneself from the corrosive effects of resentment. Seneca wrote extensively about how holding on to anger and bitterness harms the person who carries it far more than the person it is directed at. Resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. Forgiveness, therefore, is an act of self-liberation, a conscious decision to let go of the emotional weight that hinders one's peace of mind. Forgiveness does not require reconciliation. There are situations where rebuilding a relationship after harm is neither wise nor safe. However, forgiveness allows one to release the emotional burden associated with the event. It means saying, "I will no longer allow this hurt to occupy space in my mind and dictate my emotional state." The Stoic recognizes that holding on to anger or resentment only prolongs suffering and prevents emotional healing. Both love and forgiveness require humility. To love unconditionally, one must set aside ego, the need to be right, and the instinct to seek revenge or superiority. To forgive, one must acknowledge their own imperfections and understand that everyone, including themselves, is capable of making mistakes. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that he, too, was flawed, and that expecting perfection from others was not only unrealistic but also unjust. This humility creates space for understanding, compassion, and the willingness to extend grace to others. In relationships, whether romantic, familial, or platonic, love and forgiveness are not occasional acts but continuous practices. They are not reserved for grand gestures or dramatic moments. They are expressed in the small, quiet choices we make every day. Love is shown in the willingness to listen without interrupting, in the patience to work through disagreements without resorting to anger, and in the effort to support others without keeping score. Forgiveness is expressed in letting go of past grievances, in refusing to weaponize past mistakes and current arguments, and in choosing to see the humanity in someone even when they've hurt us. One of the most challenging aspects of practicing unconditional love and forgiveness is dealing with pride. Pride often whispers that forgiveness is weakness, that love without conditions makes one vulnerable, and that withholding affection or harboring resentment is a form of control. But the Stoics recognized pride for what it truly is, a barrier to peace and connection. Pride clings to grudges, builds emotional walls, and resists vulnerability. In contrast, love and forgiveness dismantle those barriers, creating space for genuine connection, trust, and mutual growth. However, Stoicism does not advocate for reckless vulnerability or misplaced forgiveness. There is a difference between forgiving someone and allowing them continued access to your emotional space. Forgiveness can coexist with boundaries. You can forgive someone without allowing them back into your life. You can love someone unconditionally while also recognizing that their presence is not conducive to your peace of mind. The Stoic approach balances compassion with wisdom, ensuring that love and forgiveness are extended without sacrificing self-respect or integrity. Furthermore, both love and forgiveness require strength. It takes strength to remain patient when someone tests your limits. It takes strength to offer kindness to someone who has wronged you. And it takes immense strength to walk away from a situation with love still in your heart and forgiveness still in your mind. These acts are not signs of weakness. They are the clearest expressions of inner fortitude and emotional maturity. In the Stoic view, love and forgiveness are not optional virtues. They are essential components of a life well lived. Without love, relationships become transactional and hollow. Without forgiveness, anger and resentment become chains that bind us to the past. Love allows us to see others as they are imperfect yet worthy of compassion. Forgiveness allows us to release ourselves from emotional prisons of our own making. Ultimately, unconditional love and forgiveness are not just gifts we give to others, they are gifts we give to ourselves. They are acts of liberation, allowing us to live without the burden of resentment, without the poison of bitterness, and without the weight of unfulfilled expectations. They create space for joy, peace, and meaningful connection. In a world filled with fleeting connections and emotional barriers, the Stoic approach to love and forgiveness stands as a timeless reminder of what it means to truly care for others and for oneself. For the Stoic, love is not weakness, and forgiveness is not surrender. They are strengths, deeply rooted in wisdom, humility, and an unwavering commitment to inner peace. Through the practice of unconditional love and forgiveness, The Stoic builds relationships that are not only resilient but also deeply nourishing, relationships that reflect not just emotional connection, but also the highest expression of reason, virtue, and humanity. In a world filled with conflicting expectations, social pressures, and ever-changing standards, living according to one's values stands as a cornerstone of the Stoic approach to life. For the Stoics, values are not abstract ideals or lofty principles meant to decorate philosophical discussions. They are practical guides, a moral compass that directs every action, every decision, and every interaction. In the context of relationships, living according to one's values becomes an act of both self-respect and respect for others. It ensures that our connections are built on authenticity, integrity, and mutual understanding rather than fleeting emotions, convenience, or fear of conflict. At the core of Stoic thought lies the idea that a well-lived life is one that aligns with reason, justice, courage, and self-discipline. These values are not temporary preferences or situational tools. They are unwavering standards that serve as a foundation for meaningful human interaction. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, repeatedly emphasized the importance of living in harmony with one's principles, regardless of external circumstances. In relationships, this means showing up as your true self, refusing to compromise your integrity for approval, and holding yourself accountable to the standards you claim to value. Living according to your values requires clarity. It begins with identifying what truly matters to you, not what society, family, or peers say should matter, but what aligns with your deepest sense of purpose and character. Are kindness and honesty central to your worldview? Do you value loyalty and respect above convenience and superficial connections? Without clarity, it's easy to drift into relationships where your values are routinely compromised, where you tolerate behavior that erodes your self-respect, or where you become someone you no longer recognize. The Stoic approach demands that you know your principles intimately because they will serve as your guide when decisions become difficult and emotions run high. This clarity also provides consistency. In relationships, inconsistency often breeds mistrust. If someone claims to value honesty but frequently resorts to lies, whether out of fear, shame, or convenience, their words lose meaning. Stoicism teaches that our actions, not our declarations, reveal our true values. A Stoic does not claim to value loyalty while breaking commitments or prioritize kindness while responding with cruelty. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to demonstrate one's principles, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of integrity. Relationships, whether romantic, familial, or professional, often present moments of conflict between external expectations and internal values. For example, a friend might pressure you to engage in gossip, a partner might encourage you to compromise your principles for their comfort, or a workplace might reward behavior that contradicts your sense of justice. In such moments, living according to your values becomes an act of courage. It requires the willingness to endure discomfort, face disapproval, or even risk loss in order to stay true to yourself. Epictetus reminded his students that external rewards, praise, wealth, approval are fleeting, but the peace that comes from acting with integrity is enduring. Living in alignment with your values also creates boundaries, not as walls to keep people out, but as guidelines for meaningful interaction. When your principles are clear, you understand what you will and will not tolerate in your relationships. You know when to say no, when to step back, and when to stand firm. This clarity not only protects your emotional and mental well-being, but also communicates to others how you expect to be treated. A relationship built on shared values or mutual respect for differing principles becomes a space where both parties can grow without fear of exploitation, manipulation, or betrayal. Equally important is the humility required to recognize when we have failed to live up to our values. No one is perfect, and even the most principled individual will occasionally fall short. The Stoic does not respond to these failures with denial or self-condemnation, but with reflection and correction. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that mistakes are inevitable, but what truly matters is how we respond to them. In relationships, this means acknowledging when we've acted in ways that contradict our principles, apologizing sincerely, and committing to doing better. This process not only repairs trust, but also strengthens our commitment to our values. Relationships become deeply meaningful when they are anchored in shared values. While differences in personality, background, or preferences can be bridges for growth, a fundamental misalignment of values creates friction that no amount of effort can fully resolve. A Stoic understands that values are not negotiable. They are the bedrock of trust, respect, and harmony. This is not to say that people must share identical values to connect, but there must be mutual respect for each other's principles. Without this respect, even the most passionate or affectionate relationship will eventually crumble under the weight of misunderstanding and resentment. Living according to your values also means letting go of the need for constant approval. Many people compromise their principles out of fear of rejection, fear of conflict, or fear of being misunderstood. But the Stoic recognizes that external validation is fickle and unreliable. What truly matters is whether one can look in the mirror and know that their actions align with their deepest principles. This internal sense of coherence becomes a source of unshakable confidence, allowing the Stoic to engage in relationships from a place of strength rather than insecurity. Values are also reflected in how we handle conflict. Disagreements are inevitable in any relationship, but how we navigate them speaks volumes about our character. A Stoic approaches conflict with patience, humility, and a commitment to justice. They listen without interrupting, speak without cruelty, and remain focused on resolution rather than victory. This approach not only preserves the integrity of the relationship but also reinforces the Stoics' commitment to their principles. In the end, living according to your values in relationships is about showing up authentically, consistently, and courageously. It's about refusing to betray yourself for temporary comfort or fleeting approval. It's about building connections that are not only emotionally fulfilling but also morally sound. Stoicism teaches us that our values are not meant to be hidden or compromised. They are meant to be lived, expressed, and shared with the world. When relationships are built on a foundation of values, they become more than just emotional exchanges. They become spaces for growth, trust, and mutual respect. They become environments where both individuals can thrive without fear of betrayal or compromise. For the Stoic, living according to one's values is not just a strategy for relationships, it's a strategy for life. It's a commitment to being someone others can trust, respect, and rely on, not because of empty words or grand promises, but because of consistent, deliberate, and principled actions. In a world where authenticity is often sacrificed for acceptance and principles are bent for convenience, the Stoic approach serves as a reminder that the greatest gift we can offer others and ourselves is to live with unwavering integrity. Through this commitment, relationships cease to be battlegrounds for control or validation and instead become sanctuaries for connection, trust, and shared purpose.